Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Crash-A-Thon, where I will be going through every single mainline series Crash Bandicoot game. We've already had a look at the humble beginnings of the original Crash Bandicoot and the fantastic step up and continuation of Crash 2. So I guess the next logical step would be to round off the original trilogy with Crash Bandicoot 3 Warped. As we have established already, the original Crash, despite being fairly janky and flawed, set the foundations for the franchise. Crash 2 built upon those foundations, reworking and refining every aspect of the gameplay. Okay, nearly every aspect. Creating one of the best sequels I've ever seen, and much like its predecessor, raking in the sales and critical acclaim. Crash was riding high at this point and was becoming recognised as a mainstay franchise. So it only made sense for Naughtly Dog to shoot for the hat trick, and they did just that. And exactly 1 year after the last game, Crash Bandicoot 3 Warped was released. From the get-go, this game oozes its charm with that awesome startup sequence, the menu, and the kick-ass definitive Crash theme song. Da 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 da. This theme makes me come. The story of Crash 3 picks up directly where Crash 2 left off. After the Cortex Vortex was destroyed, one of the pieces of debris falls down to Earth, crashing into an ancient temple, freeing Uka Uka, an evil mask who is also Aku Aku's twin brother. It turns out that he was the one giving Cortex these orders to take over the world this whole time, and now he's pretty pissed that Cortex has cocked up twice already. With all the power crystals and gems gone from the planet, they instead form a new plan with the help of new villain Dr. Entropy, the master of time and creator of the Time Twister machine, which they are using to send Cortex's minions to other time periods to gather gems and crystals. So Crash, Coco and Aku Aku must go on an adventure throughout time to collect and find the crystals before Cortex's minions do, so that we can ultimately stop a saggy-faced scientist, a clockman and an evil slab of wood from taking over the world, as you do. Unlike Crash 2's pretty dumb setup, here it's simple, straight to the point and full of charm and character. The imposing first appearance of Uka Uka, the way Entropy is introduced with him being this mysterious silhouette slowly stepping out of the shadows, and hearing for the first time the gorgeous voice of Mel Winkler as Aku Aku.
My evil twin, Uka Uka, has been freed from his underground prison. Long ago, I locked him there to protect the world from his malice.
Absolutely fantastic. Rest in peace, dude. You're an absolute legend. Simply put, a pretty great setup for what is, I'd say, a pretty great game. There does seem to be this ongoing debate amongst Crash fans over which of the original trilogy is the best. Crash 1 is mostly left out of the running unless you're talking about the insane version, so it's normally seen that you're either a Crash 2 or Crash 3 kind of person. And if you saw my last video, you'll know that I'm definitely more of a Crash 2 guy. That's not to say that I think Crash 3 is bad by any means, far from it. I really enjoy this game. It just does some things that I'm not really a fan of and that I feel drag the overall experience down. In terms of gameplay, the core platforming really isn't a whole lot different from Crash 2. That game already revamped and improved upon so much of the original game's formula. When you get down to it, it is more or less the same deal as Crash 2, complete with many returning gameplay elements, like the bonus and death platforms, chase sequences, dark levels, hanging bars, the warp room style. It didn't really change much from Crash 2 because, well, it didn't really need to. The platforming gameplay was already pretty solid, so most if any changes Crash 3 made were mainly small tweaks and simple polishes. Crash's movement and jumping just feel that little bit more slick, and small changes like making the bouncing crates break in 5 jumps as opposed to 10, a box tally allowing you to keep track of how many boxes you need to break in a level and now pretty much near to no more backtracking sections, just slight adjustments here and there to improve the game flow and pace a bit more. Okay, tell a lie, there is an expansion to Crash's moveset in quite a big capacity, with these extra abilities that are unlocked as you progress throughout the game. Upon beating each boss for the first time, you'll receive a permanent new ability for Crash that really does change the way you play. The first one, the Super Belly Flop, is admittedly pretty meh, since it just allows you to break locked crates, which is something you could do from the get-go in Crash 2, but then the second and third bosses reward you with the double jump and death tornado spin respectively. These two power-ups really elevate the gameplay tenfold. The double jump obviously allows you to jump twice as high as usual, and the tornado spin allows for a more prolonged spin attack. But combine these two moves together and you can use it to double jump and glide over long gaps which you couldn't reach over normally. The fourth power-up, the fruit bazooka, is also really damn useful, allowing you to shoot Wumpa fruit at crates or enemies from a distance. What makes these power-ups a real game changer is that they're not only useful within the certain moments when the game requires you to use them, but they're just really versatile throughout the entirety of the platforming levels. The double jump and death tornado spin just make getting through and shortcutting the levels way more quicker and satisfying with many ways that you can use them. And the fruit bazooka is extremely useful for clearing the path ahead to make things that tad bit easier. Overall, I'd honestly say that with the same great level design and expanded mechanics, Crash 3's platforming levels are among some of his best, and it's all very
nice.
Oh, don't mind me, this is all just for protection, because I feel like I'm gonna upset a lot of people in the next few seconds. Yeah, I don't like Crash Bandicoot 3's vehicle levels. Oh, shit! Vehicle levels, or perhaps more appropriately, non-platforming levels, have always been a part of Crash's gameplay, originating with the Hog levels in Crash 1, then expanding it slightly with the Polar Bear levels, Jetpack levels, and Jetboard sections in Crash 2. Crash 3, on the other hand, introduces a lot more vehicles, or again, non-platforming levels, each with different controls and gameplay. And I'm sorry to say that these are perhaps the biggest drawback of the game for me, because to be frank, I simply don't like many of these vehicle levels. Okay, before I get into the negative, I do need to state the one level type I do love in this game are of course the tried and true animal riding levels. And this game's incarnation is perhaps the best version yet, with you playing as Coco riding on Pura along the Great Wall of China. The vibe is bouncy and upbeat, they're incredibly well designed, they control brilliantly and are densely packed with obstacles and challenges to overcome. And Coco thankfully doesn't fornicate with the wildlife. All the other vehicle-based levels though, Firstly, there's the jet ski levels. Now, I don't think these control too bad, honestly, but I'm just not really a big fan of the level design, and for what they are, a couple of them do go on for a bit too long, I feel. I can kinda say the same thing for the underwater levels. While they control okay enough, I guess, I'm just not digging the gameplay here. I just find them a tad finicky and too slow paced, which ultimately makes the levels feel like more of a drag. The same goes for the flying levels, but for kind of different reasons. While yes, mechanically there's nothing a whole lot wrong with them, I just find them to be very dull, very slow, and a bit too short. Also, Crash looks like a demented minion on crack here.
Disgusting!
Oh dear god though, let's get on to the motorbike levels. Now, what's perhaps the most delicate way of putting this? They're fucking dog shit. I hate these levels, and that's not a joke. I genuinely have a deep hatred for these goddamn levels. By far one of the worst parts of any Crash game for me. The idea of these levels is to win a race while avoiding obstacles along the way. Seems simple, right? No, because it plays and controls like pure wank. It is so stiff and restrictive to turn, and that's not really great for a very winding level design such as this. And going faster, which you know is something that you kind of want to do if you're gonna win a race, makes it even worse. The obstacles will nearly always bring you to a grinding halt, and the other cars can knock you off the road, slowing you down way too easily. And it doesn't help that these levels demand that you be nearly perfect in order to simply win to get the crystal. Most of the time, one fuck up will cost you the whole race. I really do hate these miserable pieces of shite levels, and what makes it worse, there's 4 of these bloody things in the game. And that's perhaps the most annoying part of these vehicle levels as a whole. There's way too many of them. There's 14 vehicle levels in total, practically half the damn game for God's sake. I know that a lot of people really enjoy these levels, and you know what? Awesome, that's great. But to me personally, Crash Bandicoot is a platformer first and foremost. And I don't think there's anything wrong with having vehicle levels here and there, but not to this extent. Crash 2, I think, balanced this perfectly. It focused on a couple good vehicle concepts that worked and gave them 2-3 levels each at the most, and even spliced them into the platforming levels. They didn't overstay their welcome, and they didn't take away from the platforming in any way, and I think that's why I tend to lean more towards the second game. But here in Crash 3, I unfortunately can't say the same. Again, this is all just my opinion, and I have to state now that I think Crash 3 really knocks it out the park with the rest of the game. And look, I'm not stating that most of these vehicle levels are bad, it's just that I don't really think they're that good either. They're really mediocre for the most part, and I think for what they are, they take up way too much of the game, and that's really the only big problem I have with Crash 3. On the brighter side though, as I said, the platforming really is Crash at his best, I think. Supported by the game's, once again, really solid presentation. By far the best looking of all the Crash games on the PS1, with a bigger scope and attention to detail in the environments, and just a lot more visual distinctions to set each level apart, giving us perhaps the most diverse visuals with the whole time travel theme. And not to mention a more ambitious soundtrack with more varied instrumentation and more stylized melodies. Not quite as memorable or as punchy as Crash 2's, but still awesome. And I've not even gotten started on the bosses yet. As Crash Bandicoot bosses go, these are amongst some of his best, and more than make up for the train wreck that was Crash 2's boss fights. There's also this great element of the bosses taunting you in the lead up to their fights with these brief cutscenes before levels. It gives a lot more charm and character and builds up the confrontation with them a lot better. I don't like staring at Tiny directly from the front though, this feels very uncomfortable. Speaking of, Tiny is also our first boss, and what a great first fight. Having to avoid some reasonably speedy attacks alternating with these onslaught of lions, a good light challenge to ease you in. Dingo Dahl is our second boss, and while I hate to think what form of sexual abomination spawned something like him, his fight is great. You have to avoid his fast-paced attacks, then lure him into destroying enough of his own shield to attack him, but then get out without being blown up. Entropy is also pretty damn good, requiring you to focus and act quickly against his fast-moving attacks before platforming over to spin him, and the whole time travel gimmick of the setting really works nicely here as well. Engine, while being a flying style boss, really makes it work to its advantage by keeping it on a single plane of movement, while you have to avoid a ton of attacks coming at you while also having to simultaneously keep your attacks aimed and focused at his weak spots. And just when you think it's over, it then goes into a whole second phase with more crazy and hectic shit, just overall a really energetic and fast-paced boss battle. Finally, we end on Cortex once again, by far the best Cortex fight of the original trilogy, with you having to avoid his attacks while Aku Aku and Uka Uka do whatever anime shit you can call this, wait until his shield goes down and knock him into the middle, rinse and repeat. Not the game's best boss by any means, but a good one to end on. And beating him gives you the game's final power-up that I neglected to mention earlier, the Crash Dash, allowing you to run faster, mainly because it's intended for one specific purpose, the brand new time trials. Once a level has been completed, upon returning, there'll now be a clock at the beginning, and touching it will turn the level into a time trial. At this point, your goal is to simply make it to the end of the level as fast as possible, and to help you out along the way, you'll have to break these time crates that will freeze time for the amount of seconds displayed on the box. And these can be especially taxing and really test your skill and knowledge of the level, as you are essentially trying to pull off a perfect run here by making you run through the level without dying once as quick as you can. Your reward for completing these are the time relics that come in 3 tiers depending on how quick your time is. The easiest basic bitches are the sapphires, then you have the slightly harder gold relics, then if you're a sadistic masochistic bastard, then there's the platinums. These are brutal to acquire since you need to pull off a practically flawless run, and I would only recommend them to die-hard players. Or I guess if you're someone who wants an experience comparable to cock and bull torture, then be my guest. Thankfully though, all you actually need to get to the end of the game are the sapphires. The relics are needed to access the game's secret levels in order to get more gems. Once you get all of them, you can face Cortex once again to see the full ending. The time twister implodes on itself, trapping Cortex, Entropy and Uka Uka in the past, leaving on a cliffhanger that we are due to see the follow-up to in Crash 4. Not that one. You know, it's kind of hard to talk about Crash 3 since its core gameplay really isn't a whole lot different to Crash 2 aside from the slight refinements, and the majority of the new additions are not ones I'm really that fond of personally. I mean, when it sticks to core Crash platforming, it nails it 100%, and it does make some great innovations with the permanent power-ups and the time trial mode. I just think it strayed a bit off course with the majority of the more experimental vehicle levels. But again, I recognise that's probably more of a personal criticism, as I know a lot of people do enjoy them. In the end, I still love Crash 3, and I think it rounded off the trilogy brilliantly. I just still prefer Crash 2 due to it being identical in its playstyle, but with that bigger focus on platforming, which is what I think Crash should be. And so with that, I give you the original PS1 Crash Bandicoot trilogy. While not the most original, groundbreaking, or revolutionary trifecta of games, it certainly was one of the most iconic on the console. Taking the simple linear platforming gameplay from previous generations and transforming it into the 3D format, and combined with its wonderfully quirky charm, it created a solid, enjoyable platforming experience that has stood the test of time. So much so that it was to be remade over a decade later, and I would highly recommend anyone looking to give the franchise a shot to try this collection out. After Crash 3, Naughtly Dog would round off their time with the Bandicoot with the fantastic Crash Team Racing, which I have already made a video on, so feel free to check that out. So hey, we may have made it through the original trilogy, but the Crash-A-Thon is only just beginning. Now that we're done with all the PS1 Crash titles, it's time to move on to the next generation of Crash games. Oh, fuck it.